some of you have never heard this before, but the church is one of the largest pension programs in our country. Not only are we the largest denominational program, larger than any denomination has, but we're larger than most Fortune 500 companies. We're like in the top 100 with respect to the size of the pension program that we have. So there's sometimes that we lead in our society with respect to the kinds of things that we offer. And our investment program is one of these. We're about to introduce a new life stage service that comes in retirement that deals with how money is paid to people without going to an insurance company, and that's about to be introduced in January. So I want to mention that, even though I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about life stage investments. If I do have some questions, I'll try to handle them, because there are slides, but I'm going to probably ignore them when we get to them. And then last, I will talk about Ernst & Young. There's a sheet that you've got, a loose sheet that's in your material that talks about the life stage service that's been around since 2005. So let's get started with the Book of Discipline. How many of you brought your Book of Discipline? Perhaps a few DSs did, but most people don't carry their Book of Discipline with them. The one thing that's critical to know about our retirement paragraphs is that they are different than what a lot of people know from Social Security. It's also different than lay people with respect to retirement. I actually can retire at any time by just simply notifying my employer, and away I go. You, when you retire as a clergy person, it's a voted relationship. And you have to be voted this, so you look around the room, make sure you're in good standing with your brothers and sisters in Christ, because they vote you the retired relationship. But these are specific paragraphs that are in the Book of Discipline. And when we talk about pension, the two differences that I really need to know if I was trying to help you understand your pension is, are you retiring early or are you retiring with full benefits? I very much don't like the word normal. There's sort of no such thing as normal retirement. Social Security used full retirement age, but since it's a different number than we use in the United Methodist Church, I think it's just helpful to talk about reduced benefits and unreduced benefits. So either somebody's going to retire early or with full benefits. What is full benefits? It is retiring once you have attained 65, age 65, on or before July 1st, or have completed 40 years of service. And it's an or, so you don't have to have both. In fact, you might only have 5 years of service but turn age 65. You get to have your full benefits as long as you've turned age 65. But somebody can also be age 61 and have 40 years of service. And that person is able to retire with full benefits because it's an or. And it's whichever one you come to first. Early retirement is age 62. That's the earliest that you can retire by age. But there is also an or for the early retirement, which is 30 years of service. And that number in my own history has been going down quite a bit. In 2004, it dropped all the way back to 30 years of service. It used to be 35, it used to be 37. It's all the way down to 30 years of service, but you don't see a lot of people necessarily retiring in their 50s because the reduction is pretty strong, and we'll see that when we talk about the pension program. Another paragraph in the Book of Discipline is the 20-year retirement. 20-year retirement is not like other retirement that we see in society. It's not like teachers, firefighters, police workers, or other civil servants, because 20-year retirement, while it is a retired relationship, it doesn't carry with it the ability to start any benefits. So if a person retires on the 20-year rule, they still have to wait until they turn age 62. So 20-year retirement is usually something that we don't talk about very much. It does protect a very old program, the pre-1982 program, and it does give somebody the ability to use the housing allowance. But other than that, the 20-year retirement is something that takes you out of the appointment system, but it's not something that carries with it the ability to start your pension. You have to be old enough if you retire in the 20-year rule. And then sometimes people are surprised that we have a mandatory retirement age, and we do. That's turning 72 on or before July 1st. So the church is not subject to the Age and Discrimination Act, so we do have a mandatory retirement. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you won't still be in ministry. We still have plenty of people who serve as retired supply pastors or do other forms of ministry even when they're no longer under a regular appointment. People can serve as retired supply pastors or just simply do other work, but there's no new pension paid to them once they take mandatory retirement when they turn 72. Any questions before we move on? Yes? The question I have is from somebody who's on incapacity leave, and what I'm going to try to do is answer questions in a broad way, because I'm going to actually come to some slides that are going to talk about disability into the future, so I don't want you to be confused about rules that apply to you, because there's nothing that's basically retroactive. But a person who's on incapacity leave right now can take benefits as long as the doctor keeps on approving it all the way to age 65. So normally there is a communication from our office, from the conference, and also from the company that we use that helps us to administer the disability program. The name of that company is called Unum. So you would be getting plenty of correspondence when you would transition from disability benefits to retirement benefits. So I'm actually not even going to answer the question about whether it would be reduced or not. We first just need to talk about when would you need to make the transition from disability benefits to retirement. And so when I see the slide, please ignore it, because this has to do with people who go on incapacity in the future. I can also help anyone who's got an individual question before I leave today, or I'll give you a way to get a hold of us, both with our 800 number, by email, and going into our portal. We have a brand new portal on our internet. Okay, let's move on to the very first things we need to understand. You have something in your packet. It's the 2013 Comprehensive Protection Plan, benefit amounts from the Comprehensive Protection Plan. People don't get this automatically, and unfortunately we've still not yet made it easy for people to get it off of the internet, but we're going to try and do that. This is a very critical document that you should have with your vital records, because on this it describes death benefits, disability benefits, but there's also some other benefits that we're not going to talk too much about. Usually they're more helpful for younger clergy because there are education benefits for children up until age 18, and then there's even a college benefit that goes all the way up until age 25. We also sometimes, unfortunately, have people in their ministry who die early in their ministry, and there is a benefit payable to a spouse. That's the minimum amount. So we're going to cover only basically the death and disability benefits, but I do want you to know that there are educational benefits for children described on here, and there's also a minimum surviving spouse benefit for somebody who's very early in their career. Now, the Comprehensive Protection Plan is not something that necessarily everybody is in. If you're full-time and appointed to a local church, there would be no question that you're enrolled. But if you're serving part-time, or if you're on some kind of a leave, sabbatical leave, education, family leave, these are things that conferences have special rules about. And I'm going to encourage you to find out if you're enrolled in the Comprehensive Protection Plan by contacting your own conference office about that. So we're not going to deal with the eligibility, but I am going to assume for the discussion I have right now that you are enrolled in the Comprehensive Protection Plan. So in the Comprehensive Protection Plan, we have these death and disability benefits. I need to switch the slides here. But they're pegged to a number called the Denominational Average Compensation, or the DAC. The Denominational Average Compensation is a benchmark that we only use for these death and disability benefits, but it's also a critical part of the formula for our brand new pension program. CRISP, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, does a lot with this denominational average compensation, and it does change every year. What is the denominational average compensation? It's the average of all full-time clergy throughout the United States. It includes people like bishops and cabinet members. It even includes people who are appointed full-time beyond the local church, as long as they're in one of our denominational pension programs. If they're not, if they're appointed beyond the local church and whoever the employer is has their own pension program, we actually don't know anything about their salary, so they're not included. You might ask me, why do I know already what the 2014 denominational average compensation is? What year are we in, 2012? It's because these numbers are 2 years old. We figured out the 2014 denominational average compensation based on what people are paid this year. And there is no inflation added to it. So it is a peg, but it's a lagging peg, meaning it's basically 2 years old that we use when we calculate our benefits. So the denominational average compensation is used on some of the calculations for this sheet. So if you can move to the next slide. This is another explanation about how the denominational average compensation is calculated. Some of you may not know what your own individual plan compensation is. And plan compensation is your salary. It's basically your box 1 of your W-2 that you get from your local church. But there's things missing from box 1. If you put money into a flexible spending account, some type of cafeteria plan for health insurance or for dependent care reimbursement, maybe people have children, or for their daycare they're getting reimbursed. But many of you, and hopefully almost all of you, you're going to hear why this is critical in a moment, should be contributing to your own United Methodist personal investment plan. And when you put money into your own personal investment plan, you sign an agreement where the best way to do that is to take the money away from taxation in the year that you're contributing in it. That's called pre-tax. So that money doesn't show up in your W-2. So box 1 doesn't show the money that you're putting into your own personal investment plan. But when we calculate the denominational average compensation, when we want to figure out what your own plan compensation is, if you're having money taken out for pension purposes, we put it back in to come up with a number. So this is a number that has nothing to do with taxes. It has to do with the number of what are we using for you as something that your pension is going to be based on, and it's also something that your disability benefit would be based on. This example may be a little bit confusing to you because it shows 2 different lines, a housing exclusion and the 25% shown as the parsonage value. But we do that because it is possible, and local churches sometimes do this, a local church will designate money for things like utilities, for furnishings, to make some upgrades that perhaps the property committee does not want to do. Some things for which the pastor decides to try to do with the parsonage that they're living in. And they can have a housing exclusion in addition to being provided a parsonage. So it's not necessarily all that rare. But if we do get that reported, if this shows up on your cabinet worksheets, that a church is giving a housing allowance in addition to the parsonage, we need to know that number because it gets added in before we take the 25%. For those of you who are not living in a parsonage, we just simply use the number that the church declares as the housing allowance. We're going to talk a little bit more about the housing allowance for retirement, but not until we get through quite a few different pension programs. So, the disability benefit. Many of us were taught that it was a number times the denominational average, but for the better part of a decade, it actually is a replacement of your plan compensation, 70% of it. So remember, again, that's your salary plus some number for your housing. 70% is your disability benefit, but the 70% is both the comprehensive protection plan and Social Security. So the 70% is a coordinated benefit. It adds Social Security disability benefits along with money that's going to be paid from the comprehensive protection plan. 70%. It does require approval. One of the things maybe I should share with you is our church only has a long-term disability program. I think it's the next slide, but I'm not sure. Yes, here it is. The definition of disability is for people who are unable to perform the duties of their job as a clergy. Now, this is a much more generous definition than what you see for Social Security. You're unable to do your job as a clergy person, perhaps not even able to preach. That's not good enough for Social Security, but voice impairments, if it's going to last more than 6 months, would count. We don't, within our denomination, have a short-term disability program, but we define long-term disability as expected to have an incapacity that lasts 6 months or longer. And again, Social Security uses a whole year as their definition. The church uses 6 months as our definition. But what the church does is we pay those disability benefits right away. Sometimes it takes a while for the doctor and the paperwork to be approved, but then they're paid retroactively to the day that the person is no longer able to serve in the local church. But our long-term disability program does not have a waiting period. The only sort of sense of a waiting period really has to do with the approval process for how long that takes. But again, then those benefits are sometimes paid back retroactively. If somebody does not, if you go back to the slide that we had here before, the thing that's at the bottom, sometimes people don't have a disability that qualifies for the Social Security definition. And so if that's true, a person is only going to get disability benefits from the Comprehensive Protection Plan, then the benefit is 40% of the denominational average compensation. And that is listed on this sheet. And I can't tell you exactly where it is, but it's 40% of $63,867. That's what the disability would be for next year, for 2013. Okay, there's been some changes to this at General Conference. For one of the things that we were having an experience different than society is that almost nobody was coming off of incapacity leave and going back to the local church. And that's not because our clergy don't feel like working. It has very often to do with some of the other problems of either dealing with appointment issues, when people come off of incapacity, what the doctor is saying, whether somebody can handle the stress of going back to working in a local church or not. But there was also a disincentive because the people who are most likely to go back to work who have been on incapacity are people who can get their toes back in the water by having some part-time work first. Trying to go all the way from not working to full-time employment is extremely difficult. And the system that we had made this extremely hard because the moment you got any money, it would start to take away your disability benefit. And so even just financially, sometimes people they would prefer to volunteer than they would prefer to work in an employment situation of some kind. So what General Conference changed is they made no changes to people who've been on incapacity for 2 years or less, 24 months or less. But they changed that once a person who's been on disability for 2 years or longer, the offset is no longer going to be $1 for $1. It'll be 50 cents for every dollar that the work is back. And then there's going to be other incentives to get back into work. But at least the penalty of having an offset, where if you made money, it was immediately taken away from you. Once somebody's been on incapacity for 2 years or longer, it's not quite so strong. It's a 1 for every 2. The other thing that General Conference changed is dealing with a disincentive. Sometimes a doctor will say that somebody can come back to work, and under some unusual circumstances, the person will say, I don't want to do that. And yet, since the doctor says that the person could return to work, they're healthy enough, they're well enough in order to do that, the fact that they are not returning to work means that our denomination is indeed paying a benefit that it basically should not be paying. And so there's going to be a disincentive. People are basically going to be penalized for staying on incapacity leave if the doctor does indeed say they can go back to work. Now, sometimes a lot more discussion is needed between cabinet, our office, the attending physicians, and our vendor, the UNUM people, because sometimes the doctor isn't clear about whether somebody really could or could not return to work. But if somebody can return to work, there's going to be a disincentive if somebody does not. So while it's been rare, I think out of 800 people, there were roughly 2 people who came back to work in the last 2 years. The number of people who could have come back was something like 20% of that group. So there should have been like 160 people coming back to work, and only 2 people did. So depending on the conference, there are going to be people who come back from incapacity and go back to work. Not retire, but actually come back and work. And then there will be a change in how long somebody can stay on incapacity. The rule today for people who have already been on incapacity is that they can go all the way to age 65. If they became incapacity after age 60, they could stay on for 5 years. But that's the rule that's changing. Other denominations, the corporate world, Social Security has always made it clear that when people are basically incapacitated, especially in their later 60s, These are not the groups of people who can come back to work. They're basically going to transition from incapacity to retirement benefits. And so what we're doing is we're about to use the rules of Social Security to be our benchmark as to how long somebody can stay on incapacity. There's a very tiny small group of people where this is actually a benefit. If somebody got incapacitated at age 60, next year in 2013, the old rule was they could stay on for 5 years. Now they could go until age 66, because that's when Social Security full retirement benefits are. But that's like the only age group that actually gets a benefit out of this. Everybody else, they're going to have to come out faster. So again, this doesn't apply to people who are already on incapacity leave. They're going to be simply using the old rules. But if somebody goes on incapacity from here going forward in 2013, depending on how old they are, and you can see by the chart here, they can only stay on for a certain length of time, and it's never going to be a full 5 years. One of the things I need to share with you about the disability program, and you're going to hear this in the pension as well, one of the things that we've been dealing with, which is, again, I think some of the things that the church sometimes does very well, we do adjust both as a body of Christ, but also as people who live in covenant, where when there's things that need to be changed, we take those things seriously and try to deal with them. And the things that had been going on up until the General Conference of 2012 was saying, perhaps we have been working in an environment where things are not sustainable, that if we keep on going forward without making the adjustments, we're not going to be able to keep on having enough money to pay the things that we know are essential, and we don't want to just simply willy-nilly take things away. We want to do it intelligently. So there were changes just like this for the Comprehensive Protection Plan that was done at General Conference, that was done for the purpose of making sure that the Comprehensive Protection Plan would be sustainable for the long haul and still do its job effectively. Doesn't it sound, even though I'm a layperson, doesn't it sound like preaching that you do from day to day on Sunday about where we are in the United States, about needing to do some accountability, about where we are as a nation for our sustainability? So I think it's one of the cases where we try not to have too much hubris, too much pride within the United Methodist Church. But I think in some respects I can be happy that although General Conference was a difficult one in 2012, when it came to adjusting the benefits, it did it in a very rational way, and there are things that can be done, but nothing was just simply lopped off or taken away without there being quite a bit of consideration. Okay, I talked about the disability benefit. The last one before we get rid of the Comprehensive Protection Plan is to talk about death benefits. And General Conference did make a change for death benefits. It did not make a change for death benefits for active. For the active people, it is basically the you have the slide, but it's basically the middle column of death benefits. Our death benefits are based on the, you have to go back to the slide before. Our death benefits are based on the denominational average compensation. So they're pegged to whatever the DAC is. And when we want to know what next year's benefit is going to be, we have to know what next year's denominational average compensation. So you see at the top of this page, 2013 has a $63,867 DAC, and the death benefits are 20, 15, and 10% of that amount. The one benefit that's not pegged to the denominational average compensation is the death of an active pastor. That's been $50,000 ever since 1996. That's because our DAC got to the point where 1.5 times our salaries got up to $50,000. That's all the government will let workers have free of tax. You can only have $50,000 worth of death benefits, and that's never been changed. It's been $50,000 for many decades, for a long time. And the problem is that while we sometimes think our clergy families need more than $50,000 worth of coverage, the problem is our poor local church treasurers would never fill out a W-2 correctly because they have to look up how old the pastor is and look up how much is over $50,000. It's a very difficult thing to do. We actually had to do that back in 1995 and 1996. So General Conference said, no more of this. We'll just cut it off at $50,000, If people need more benefits than this, they can go get them. And we do have a program within our United Methodist Church called Life Options, something that people can sign up for. But that doesn't change each year. Death of an active pastor is $50,000. Now, this is not anything that General Conference changed. What General Conference did change was for people who retire in the year 2013. The first rule about people retiring in the year 2013 is the old rule was that you had to be in 5 of the last 10 years. And the concern was the comprehensive protection plan for people who are second career clergy. Let's say somebody came in at age 55, served the denomination 10 years, and then retired. If they're only in 5 of those last 10 years, I guess my example should be somebody who came in at age 60. They became a local pastor at age 60 and retired at age 65. 5 years of being in the comprehensive protection plan did not have long enough of a service in order for the comprehensive protection plan to be able to give death benefits for free in retirement. So it's been 5 of the last 10 years. It's going to work its way all the way up to 10 of the last 12 years. Now again, sometimes we have people who are appointed beyond the local church late in their careers, and that's okay as long as they had 25. So the bullet, the third one down from the top, says that an active participant's been in 25 years. They don't have to have been in 10 of the last 12 years as long as their career included 25 years worth of being in this program. But most clergy have not been around that long. We're starting to get, obviously, a little bit back towards having younger clergy come into the denomination, but the average age of people coming in has actually been pretty high. It's been in the late 40s. So 10 of the last 12 is what we're aiming for. If you're somebody who's retiring in the next couple of years, we'll try to help you understand if you've got enough years for the comprehensive protection plan. The 2013 retiree, it's 6 of the last 10. If you're retiring in the year 2014, it's 7 of the last 10. And so if you've been in the comprehensive protection plan, you get the death benefit. The death benefit, for the first time in my history, and it's a very long one, we are now going to have a death benefit that's rounded off to a number. So the people retiring in 2013, 14, 15, 16, all these years going into the future, what's the death benefit going to be? It's going to be these numbers right here, 50, 20, 15, I'm sorry, the 50 is for active. So if we have a retiring clergy, the death benefit is 20, death of a spouse is 15. What's the difference between the death of a spouse and the death of a surviving spouse? It has to do with who died first. So if the clergy person dies first, we have the death of a surviving spouse. If the clergy person is still living when the spouse dies, then we have the death of a spouse. So while I've already been doing a good job of complimenting the United Methodist Church, and even though I've worked in benefits for such a long, long time, I have to confess to you that I really don't understand why it takes more money to bury somebody, whether the pastor is still living or died first. So we do have surviving spouse, and we do have spouse benefits, and why they're different, don't ask me why. Whoever your delegates were to General Conference way back in 1980, ask them, because I have no idea. So these are the new death benefits, and they're not going to go up when the salaries go up. They're going to stay at this level into the future. If inflation becomes a very serious issue 10 years from now, General Conference will say, hey, when you rounded those numbers and rounded them up, it was good for a while, but it's time to give them another little jump, and that won't happen for quite a long time. It's another cost-saving benefit, but the people who, usually it's the people who retire in the next couple of years, they're not the ones to die first anyway. The people, obviously, who are, when you get your death notices in the annual conference, it's the people in their 80s, 90s. And who is it that lives to be age 100? It's very often not the clergy. It's who? Surviving spouses. So I saw some spouses in the room. I'm not sure that's going to work out for me. I'm not sure I'm planning to live to age 100, but sometimes that happens. Okay, let's move on to how it is that we know who gets paid the death benefit. The death benefit is never something that's done by will, by your last will and testament. It's done by beneficiary designation. And this is critical for you to hear. Beneficiary designations are critical for the Comprehensive Protection Plan, but this is my time to talk to you also about your pension beneficiary of designation. Beneficiary of designation is very much like a contract. It's the way life insurance, it's the way pension works. Those forms are critical to have filled out. And we actually hounded you these last 2 or 3 years to tell you, here's what we have on our system, is that right? And you had to come back and actually verify with us that yes, those are the beneficiaries that I want for my situation should I die. Now, those can be changed at any time, and it's also something that you can now change online. And sometimes it's a little bit interesting for me to observe what I have seen. I see way too many people within our denomination who get lazy about naming not necessarily their first beneficiary, the primary beneficiary, but they're lazy with respect to naming the secondary beneficiary. If you're married, almost always your spouse is primary, but there's nothing that stops you and your spouse from dying at the same time. There's also the issue that sometimes people don't get around to filling out their forms quick enough. Who did Bobby Kennedy have as his executor when he died? He had his older brother, John Kennedy, who was already deceased. And by the way, that's shocking because this is an attorney who had not updated his critical documents. So for all of you, even though I hope you will update your beneficiary designations, in case you don't, it's critical to name your secondary beneficiary. And the thing that I see people too lazy about for the secondary beneficiary is they'll write, I want it to be payable to my estate. Now if you get it payable to your estate, that works. And it's probably okay for the death benefit that we're talking about here for the Comprehensive Protection Plan, because death benefits are not taxable. But you know what happens when you leave your pension money to your estate? Whoever your executor is going to try and raise you from the dead, because your beneficiary designation, naming your estate doesn't get the opportunity to spread the payments out over a lifetime. That's the reason why pension is most frequently, when you talk to a financial planner, and again, I'm in front of you as a recovering prior used to do financial planning. I don't do this anymore, so what I'm trying to give you is education. But for those of you who named your estate for your pension purposes, you probably need to go back and think very clearly about whether that was the right thing to do. I'm going to talk to you about how you can get a hold of Ernst & Young. Maybe you need to go contact an attorney. But it's a simple thing to get your form changed. It's just better to name people because they can spread it out over time. And if you can't think of the people who to leave it to, obviously you can leave it to charity. And if you do have a complicated situation, just be very careful if ever you name a trust, because the trust has to already know that it's getting pension money. A simple trust, if it doesn't know it's getting pension money, it probably doesn't have good language in it to spread it out over somebody's lifetime. So there's a good chance that a fourth of you in this room, you wrote down your estate someplace on your beneficiary form, and you need to rethink that about getting something else. Now you can have 3 different beneficiary forms. You can have one for the Comprehensive Protection Plan, that's a death benefit. You can have a second beneficiary form, and that's for the pension that the church provides to you. And we're going to talk about those pieces. There's never a piece from pre-82. There's only a piece from the ministerial pension plan if you die before the benefit begins, basically dying active. But there's always a beneficiary for your CRISP, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, and there's always a beneficiary designation for your personal account. So the personal account is the third one. Comprehensive Protection Plan is one. The Ministerial Pension Plan and the CRISP program, you'll hear what those details are in a moment, that's the second. And the third beneficiary form you can have is your personal account. So you can have as many as 3 different forms. The money doesn't always have to go to the same individual. I'm not going to come back to this except to talk about which pension programs end when somebody's life is over and which pension programs are payable to an individual with a beneficiary designation. But the fact that you need to fill out beneficiary designations, I'm not going to come back to. So do I have any questions about beneficiary designations? Yes?
Are there complications of leaving your stuff to a child?
Okay, his question had to do with leaving benefits to a child, every state has got what they call the age of majority. And so sometimes children actually can't receive money. And so whenever somebody's got children, first of all, one of the things that's likely that somebody should be doing anyway is to get a will so that you can name a guardian. One of the last things you ever want to do is have your family have to go in and fight in court as to who's going to raise children. But if a guardian is named in the will, that becomes very easy about what you probably want to do for a beneficiary designation. So while I'm not advising you to do this, it's just usually the simplest and most common thing that I see and hear people do is they don't leave it to the name of a child just simply by who they are. They say guardian of. And then basically then you end up trying to find out who that is by will or whatever, and then it becomes very clear. So thank you for that question, and that's a helpful thing to do as well. Okay, if I don't see any other questions about beneficiary designations, it's time to talk about the last two benefits of the Comprehensive Protection Plan. General Conference had a task force that actually got some work done. It was called the Church Systems Task Force, and it had 11 recommendations. A couple of them had to do with benefits, and some of the benefits had to do with people who have difficulty exiting ministry. So there is a brand new benefit from the Comprehensive Protection Plan. Unlikely those of you in this room are going to take advantage of it, but the Cabinet in particular needs to hear about this because it's called the Voluntary Transition Program. You'll hear me use the word severance in a moment, but in essence that's what we're talking about, a voluntary transition program. So it facilitates somebody who, for one reason or another, is wanting to go into another, maybe not church ministry of some kind. Perhaps there's been a change of family situation, whether it's a divorce or having to care for a dependent in the family. The person may be, we don't use this term because it's not a technical term, there may be some burnout and other issues along the way where it's unhealthy for clergy to be in a church situation. But to get out of ministry is something that, because there's no help and no transition, the Comprehensive Protection Plan is introducing a new program. So this new program, it starts January 1st of 2013. The detail about it on the next screen is... these are the rules. It doesn't show you how much. The rule is that you had to have been a member of the annual conference for at least 5 years. You have to have been in full connection. So basically this doesn't apply to local pastors. And you have to be in good standing. You better not be brought up on charges and say, oh yeah, it's time for me to exit. You have to have been in the Comprehensive Protection Plan the 5 years immediately before the separation. You can't be close to retirement. This can't be, I want my cake and eat it too. You can't get a severance payment and then still get retirement sometime relatively nearby. It is something that is voluntary, and it's something that's voluntary both on behalf of the clergy person and it's voluntary for the conference. So it's not like a pastor says, I want to get the severance, and the conference can't come to an individual and say, we want to give you the severance. It's going to be a cooperative relationship of a decision-making that has to be done both at the annual conference level and also by the individual. But it does mean that the participant has to give up their credentials. And theoretically, they will never come back to the annual conference or any other annual conference. If they do, they have to actually pay back the severance. But the whole point of this is they are leaving ordained ministry and going off to some other work in life, some other vocation. So the next slide now finally shows what the amount is. It's basically up to a maximum of a half-year salary, 26 weeks. But it's based on how many years somebody has served. You get 2 weeks for every year the person has served. So once somebody has served 13 years, that would get up to the maximum of 26 weeks worth of benefits. It's paid in a lump sum. There's some other understandings about what the conference may or may not do for health insurance and for things like that. But at least in terms of receiving a cash payment, it comes from the Comprehensive Protection Plan. So it's something that's brand new. Let's see the next slide. That finishes the Comprehensive Protection Plan. Okay, the pension program, the first one we're going to deal with. If you go back a slide here for just a minute. these are going to be the pieces that we have. Chronologically, we have a pre-1982 program. We have the ministerial pension program that was around for 25 years, from 1982 until 2006. And we've had the clergy retirement security program that started January of 2007. So those are the three church pension programs we have. And then there is your personal account. For lay people, what they basically is, they have this personal account, but the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan very often also has employer church money contributed as well, but that's not true for clergy. So we're going to take these in reverse order. We're going to start with the most recent and work our way back to pre-82. So starting in 2007, we have the Clergy Retirement Security Program, CRSP. Those people who are in some of our cities to hear our actuary talk about it, she loves to call this the CRISPY program. I'm not sure if there was some issue about calling it CRISPY. I think I would be in trouble if I called it CRISPY. So I won't say CRSP, but I'll probably say the Clergy Retirement Security Program. But it's the name of the plan starting in 2007, but it's composed of two pieces. Sometimes a lot of people say, well, what happened to our old 12% program? Because it went down to 3. What people didn't realize is that the Clergy Retirement Security Program has two pieces. A lifetime formula benefit, sometimes called a defined benefit, and an account, a brand new account from the Clergy Retirement Security Program. A new account. It's not the old ministerial pension plan, it's a brand new account. So let's talk about these two pieces. The first one is the defined benefit. This was the one where the most significant change happened at General Conference. And the other thing I need to remind you of is General Conference did not do anything that was retroactive. In other words, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, as you know it today, is exactly the way it is going to be for 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and it's also going to be true for this next year, 2013. So everything you know about the Clergy Retirement Security Program is exactly the way you were taught it. It's the same way it was voted on in 2004, and none of the changes are retroactive. All the changes to the Clergy Retirement Security Program start January 1st of 2014 going forward. So this particular little slide that you have is a little bit complicated. I'm going to tell you what's on it, but sometimes people like to see, just give me a sheet that gives me the rundown of what it is. But sometimes that's too hard to understand. So I'm going to give you examples, but this is the rundown. There is a change in the formula, and again you'll see an example, but the formula today, starting in 2007, is you take 1.25%, multiply it times the denominational average compensation of the year that somebody retires, times the years. That's the way the formula is now. So if somebody retires in 2013, that's exactly what it is. It'll be 6.5 years times the denominational average compensation for next year times 1.25. What's going to change is starting January 1st of 2014, that year will start to count using a different formula where instead of multiplying times 1.25, we multiply times 1%. So the plan has the same name, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, but it has this very significant change that there will be one formula used for the years 07 through 2013. And again, it doesn't matter when somebody retires. Those years always get that formula no matter when somebody retires. It's always going to be 1.25 for those years. It's when the years start to be earned while you're serving a church in 2014 going forward that it's going to drop down to 1%. And why did the General Conference do this, basically? They did it for sustainability. But that is a significant drop. What's the drop from 1.25 down to 1%? That's a 20% reduction. It's not the whole pension, but especially for clergy who are younger, and when we start to talk about the personal investment plan, clergy need to pay a great deal more attention to the fact that the benefit is going to be a smaller benefit off into the future, starting in 2014. The second thing that's changing is the defined contribution, and I will show you an example of this as well. But for most people, this is not going to change. It's been 3% of your own individual plan compensation, and that 3% is not going to change as long as a clergy contributes 1% of their own salary into their own personal investment plan. Now, clergy should be doing a lot more than that, but it's been a very sad state of affairs that lots and lots and lots and lots of clergy have been contributing nothing. So, the wisdom of General Conference was to say, it's time to introduce a matching program. We'll still let you have a 3% benefit from the Clergy Retirement Security Program, but you only get 2% automatically. You won't get that another 1% to go up to 3% unless you yourself put skin in the game, up to 1%. You still probably should put in more than 1%, but the match only goes for that first 1%. So it's not a hard thing to do, but starting in 2014, clergy are going to, especially if today they're putting nothing into the personal account, they're going to need to start doing that in 2014. This doesn't apply to people on incapacitated leave, but it does apply to people in local churches. The other thing that's being changed is the formula is different. The 1.25 is going down to 1%. But the other thing that's a little bit complicated to understand, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but our pre-1982 program used to include spouses as part of our past service rate. Then we went for 25 years where spouses did not get benefits unless it was a part of the clergy's calculation for what they were going to receive. Starting in 2007, unfortunately, we were paying and charging conferences more money for married people than we were for single. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with whether you're married or single at the time you were working. It had to do with married or single the day before you took the retired relationship. So it was a little goofy and a little crazy. So starting in 2014, the 1% is the formula, but it also doesn't carry with it a surviving spouse benefit. So depending on how old your spouse is, and if it's important to have the spouse be a part of your pension, it could also reduce the benefit by another roughly 15%. But it really makes a big difference as to how old your spouse is in relationship to you. So we'll again see that again as a little bit of an example, but the formula is not the only thing that changed for CRISP. It also changed for married people that at retirement, your spouse doesn't automatically get a surviving spouse benefit. If you are going to want to include your spouse with a surviving spouse benefit, your benefit will be a little bit less. And you'll understand how that works by the time we go through all the pension. So this was the one big slide. Now let me show you some quick examples. So the next slide is going to deal with, remember we are dealing with the DAC, Denominational Average Compensation. I'm starting to hum it myself. Okay, my hum is gone, and I still have some volume. The denominational average is part of the formula, so I want you to remember what the denominational average compensation is. So if you go to the next screen, I'm going to take a hypothetical retiree in the year 2016. So somebody's going to retire in the year 2016. They're going to have two parts of their formula. The first part of their formula is, I've got the years from 2007 to the end of next year, to the end of 2013. How many years is that? That's 7. Remember, the person's retiring in the year 2016, which is 9.5 years after we started, but I have to deal with my formula in two pieces. So if somebody's retiring in the year 2016, the first part of the formula is they have 7 years, 2007 through the end of 2013. That's 7 years. 7 years. Now, I had to make up a denominational average compensation, and when you make it up, you get to be nice to yourself. You round it off. So I rounded off to $70,000. That's hypothetical. $70,000 times 7 years. How do you take 1.25%? If you're using your little calculator, you multiply it times 0.0125. How do you multiply it times 1%? You multiply it times 0.01. You'll see that in a moment. So anyway, you take 1.25% times 7 years times 70,000. You come up with $6,125. We always pay the benefit on a monthly basis, so divided by 12, that's $510. But I only have part of my formula so far, 7 of the 9.5 years. What do I do for the next 2.5 years? The next 2.5 years, I have a 1% formula. So I take 1% times 70,000 times 2.5. That's $1,750. Divided by 12 is 146. And now I add the two together. 146 together with 510 is $656. And that's how we calculate what the benefit is going to be. Now, the Clergy Retirement Security Program, for the people who have been retiring in this first 5 or 6 years, it wasn't a very large program, but it's starting to become more and more significant. It was almost always paid with a 2% annual increase. That's the inflation. When somebody retires, they don't get that benefit flat for life. It actually goes up 12 months after they retire. So if you retire July 1st, 12 months later, you get a 2% increase. Retiring people can now choose something other than 2%. But the higher the protection or the higher the benefit you want, the smaller the benefit begins. And if you end up taking a lesser benefit, the higher the benefit begins. So we are starting to run into people who don't want a 2% increase, they want a 3% increase or a 4% increase. They can do that, but they need to recognize that the benefit starts lower and simply goes up faster. And this is something that we talk about when you start to do your retirement financial planning. Now, the next screen is going to explain what we do for people who retire early. All of my examples so far have dealt with somebody who has retired either at age 65 or they had 40 years of service. But if somebody retires early, let's change. If somebody retires early, there is a reduction. Now, one of the things I want you to hear from me, because again, I do this as not just educational, but trying to make it meaningful for you, a reduction is not a penalty. Obviously, everybody would say, well, I'd rather not wait until I'm a certain age to get my full benefits. Just give it to me now. I want it early. But in order to make things come out to be even or come out to be fair, the actuaries have decided, well, how do you have to reduce the benefit so that it's the equivalent same thing? Well, it's sort of interesting that the church and Social Security don't calculate things exactly the same way. We're pretty close, but guess who has more grace? It's the church. So what's our reduction? Our reduction is 6%. What's the Social Security reduction? It's basically 6 2/3. So they're a little bit more tough to try to make things come out to be even. So the church reduces things 6% for every year you're short, but we do it to the exact month. So if it's 6% per year, what's the same thing as 6% per year? It's a 0.5% for every month. So we again look at how many months you are short of age 65 or how many months short of 40 years of service you are. We multiply it times that 0.5%, and that's the reduction. Still get your 2% or 3% increases after you retire, but the reduction is always permanent on your initial beginning benefit. And that's just simply to make things come out to be fair. So that's why it's important for me to know if you're retiring early or retiring at age 65 or later, or 40 years of service or later. Any question about the actual reduction or any question about the formula for CRISP? Because now what I'm going to talk about is not the formula, but the account. The account that we have for CRISP is a 3% contribution. This is not money that goes into your personal account, and it's not money that goes into the ministerial pension plan. It's money that goes into a separate account. And starting in 2014, the 3% will not be automatic. It's just 2%. If you want the 3%, you yourself have to put your own 1% out of your salary into your personal account. You get to invest it any way you want to. You've got a lot of choices at retirement, but they will not be lifetime benefits. It will be an account. That's why it's important to have a beneficiary designation while you're active, but this account will still be there even after you retire. And if you die and there's still money sitting in this account, it doesn't disappear. It goes to whoever you name as a beneficiary. So let's look at an example of how this match works. You get 2% automatically. What happens if you put in 0? You don't get that extra 1%. Your benefit's going to be exactly 2% going into your account. I find it a little funny to think about somebody putting in a 0.5% of their salary. You know, what does that turn out to be? I don't even know. $300 per year? I can't even divide 300 by 12. It's a small, tiny little amount of money. So it should not be hard for people to put in 1%. But if you put in less than 1%, if you put in a half, you're only going to get a 0.5% match. If you only put in 1/4%, you're only going to get a 1/4% match. So it should not be that hard to come up with 1%, but if it's less than 1%, it gets matched up to that. What happens if you put in more than 1? The maximum you get is 1%. Even if you put in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10%, you're still only going to get 1%. Okay, let's move to the next one. Any questions about the matching program? We haven't talked about how you invest it or about how you get it out. I'm going to tell you how the money comes out in retirement when I get to the personal account. But that was the most recent pension program. Again, I have been around long enough that for the longest time I called the ministerial pension plan the new plan. Well, it's not the new plan anymore. The clergy retirement security program is the new one. For many, many of you, especially those of you who are close enough to retirement, the largest part is going to come from this plan, the ministerial pension plan. So this is the big elephant in the room. And the ministerial pension plan has some features to it that none of the rest of our pension program has. So while for some of you this is going to be the first time that you hear vocabulary that you've not heard before, that's okay. What you do need to listen for is the fact that the ministerial pension plan has choices of the kind that you don't get anywhere else in any other kind of pension program. And when those choices are confusing, the denomination gave these to you because it wanted you to have flexibility. But if you find these choices to be confusing, trying to make a decision about several hundreds of thousands of dollars is such a critical, important decision to make that perhaps you don't want to make this decision just by yourself. And that's why we're going to talk about the ability to contact Ernst & Young, to talk with your financial advisor, because at retirement, when you make a decision about the ministerial pension plan, it's for life. During your active years, there's very little you have to do. No new money is going into it. In fact, you have very little control over the investments. The ministerial pension plan is invested in the life stage investment program. The only choice you have about the life stage investment program is that you're considered to be a moderate investor. You can go aggressive and you can go low risk, but it actually doesn't change those investments that significantly. The other thing you can answer about life stage is, how soon do you think you might start your pension? So while it's assuming that you're going to go until age 65, or if you're over age 65, it assumes you're going to go to the next year. If you happen to know you're going to come out really early, or if you know you're going to go all the way until age 72, those are the things where it would be helpful for the investment program to know when it is that you're going to start your pension, because investments are best suited when the investments know what's the length of time that the money needs to be invested for. So if you're 60, it makes a big difference whether your monies are going to be invested for 2 more years or for 12 more years. And that's something that you can do with life stage. But let's talk about the ministerial pension plan, about how it works. It's a program, again, I mentioned that's been around for 25 years. It's based on what your account will be the night before your first check is cut. So, for example, if you retire at annual conference and your benefits start July 1st, it'll make a difference what's the account worth on the night of June 30th. Or if somebody's going to start their benefit October 1st, it's what's the account balance the last day of September. So it does make a big difference as to what the account, what it's valued at right before it gets set up. But it also has a lot to do with the choice that you make. What are the choices that you have? And we're going to look at what those choices in a moment. So the account is not frozen. The only reason why people even think that it's frozen is that no money has been going into it since December of 2006. But the account hasn't disappeared. We keep telling you how much is in it every quarter. but it changes with the stock market and with the bond markets. That's how it changes at the moment. So it's going to stay invested until you fill out the forms and start your benefit. And one thing I also want you to hear, which is helpful to do this in a group like this rather than just reading rules, it's not true that just because you retire, all your benefits have to start right away. You can stagger your benefits. I'm going to get to the personal account in a moment, but the personal account is actually available even without retiring. You just have to be old enough. So the personal account, you can even start before retirement. The other accounts, you can't start until retirement, but just because you do retire doesn't mean the first of the following month, everything has to get started. Now, what did I say about the CRISP program, the Clergy Retirement Security Program? It's based on what the denominational average compensation is in the year that you retire. So you know what? This is one of the benefits that people simply don't put off because it's always based on the denominational average compensation in the year that you retire. So it's one that it never makes any sense to say, I'm retiring, I'll wait to start that one. Doesn't make any sense to wait because it's based on the denominational average when you retire. But the ministerial pension plan, you'll see me talk about an article here in a moment, but the ministerial pension plan, because annuities, so if you go to the next screen, we're going to talk about the word, let's skip a couple. I'm going to make it very hard for my AV person in the back to help me. Go another screen here. Go one more. Here we go. I need to give you a little piece of vocabulary and then I'm going to go back to. The word annuity is such a confusing word to people, and it's also a word that's no, why my microphone's going in and out. It carries a lot of baggage with it, unfortunately, because it's an insurance term, but it's important what word is in front of the word annuity, whether it's a deferred annuity, or sometimes there's no word whatsoever. If there's no word in front of it whatsoever, usually I'm thinking of it in the way that the church uses the word annuity. When we think about the usage of the word, we're talking about benefits that are paid out. Not monies that are coming in as a tax-deferred annuity, but monies that are being paid out. And usually it has the word life next to it. So what is a life annuity? It's a stream of payments that lasts for life. Now, the press that talks about finances quite a bit, they hate the word annuity sometimes because the fees are very expensive and there are sometimes these products that are sold. But the word annuity has another meaning that has to do with a promise to receive benefits no matter how long you live. And annuities within the United Methodist Church are not sent out to some insurance company. We figure out the annuities for our entire group because we're such a large group. We've got tens of thousands of people who receive annuities. Sometimes people are scared about annuities because they will say, well, what happens if I die early? I lost control over my annuity. The money doesn't go to anybody. It was a life annuity, and once the life is over, or if you're married to somebody and it's a joint two-person life and both people have died, it's true that your family will not ever see any benefits coming out of that once the two people have died. But the purpose of the annuity is to make sure that you have a pension no matter how long you live. And sometimes when people try to do it by themselves, they run out of money. Sometimes very early, like in their late 70s or early 80s. And it's amazing how many people live a long time. People live a long time even if they have chronic conditions. So I'm not a financial planner who's terribly excited about people trying to figure out whether they have longevity in their genes or not. You may be the first person who ends up living a very, very long time. But are people scared about dying early? Sure they are. That is one of the concerns that's along the way. Now, the people who are concerned about dying early are the people who have the most difficult time dealing with annuities. But I want to say two things to you. One, people are concerned about, well, who's making all the profit when I die early and that annuity doesn't go to my family? It's not an insurance company. You know what? That money goes to the pool of the rest of the United Methodist clergy and spouses. So if you want to know where the money goes to, I always say look around the room, look around your conference, look around all the conferences. That's where annuities are paid. It's paid as a pool. And there has to be people who die early if there's going to be people who are still receiving benefits in their 90s and age 100. The second thing I will say to you is that people want the annuity to do two things at once. They want them to pay benefit no matter how long they live, but give them a lot of money in case they die early. That's asking too much work out of the annuity. The annuity is there in case you live a long time. That's what its protection is for. And if you're afraid of dying early, and you want to have some plans in case you do, that's what you get life insurance for. And it's nice because life insurance turns out to be non-taxable. Pension, when you leave it to your family, guess what they have the honor and privilege of doing? They'll receive it, but they have to pay taxes on it. So, annuities are extremely valuable. It's a good thing that the church has it. They've changed the rules about them, but you want to think of annuities as your friend for the ministerial pension plan. How are annuities figured out? It's based on how old you are. If you're married, how old the spouse is. What's the balance on the date that it's set up? What did you choose as a survivor benefit? And I'll show you the survivor choices in a moment. What do you want for annual increases for inflation? We seem to have magically left out 1%, so we have the choices of 0, 2, 3, 4, or 5. We use something called a mortality table. That's where I was telling you there has to be some way to try to figure out how things come out even if people take the benefit early as opposed to somebody who takes the benefit late. What I will say to you as a generality, and again, not as an economist, but I, for one, happen to believe that interest rates are not only low in the United States, I happen to think that interest rates are artificially low. And if interest rates are artificially low in the United States, you know what that means? It means that fixed annuities, which is what the ministerial pension plan has, fixed annuities are artificially low. So, I'm going to mention in a moment that the people who retire in the year 2013, they've got some flexibility that the people in 2014 don't have. It has to do with how much your ministerial pension plan must be annuitized. You're going to hear the 65% come up in just a moment. But the annuity conversion interest factor, because it is so low, if somebody came up to me and said, is it going to make a big difference about retiring in 2013 or 14? Because nothing is retroactive and because interest rates are so low, from a financial planning standpoint, I cannot think of anything that General Conference did that affects the pension in any way that would make that decision one way or the other. Obviously, if a person works an extra year, they have an extra year worth of not having taken money out of their accounts, and they've earned an extra year of money going into the pension program. So if somebody's asking me about retiring in 2013 and 2014, I would say, well, it was the same kind of decision that you had about whether retiring last year in 2012 or 2013. So there's nothing that General Conference did this is what I want to dispel. There's nothing magical that's happening about the class of retirees for the year of 2013 that says people should be heading for the doors. There's nothing that's being taken away that's significant. But you're going to see on the next screen here, you need to go back. I'm going to tell you about this article in a moment, but if you go back, one more, here. You have this one-time election, and it's got a little asterisk standing next to it because it changes between the year 2013 and 14. For a long time, I've always described this as the 35% is the maximum that you can take out of the ministerial pension plan. And when you take money out of a pension program, usually people never take it as a distribution, especially if it's a large amount of money. 35% is usually a large amount of money. You don't take it out as a distribution. You take it out and say, I need it as a rollover. And what's a rollover? A rollover is not a distribution. It's just changing which bucket of pension is the money sitting in. So a rollover moves it from one bucket into another pension bucket. That's what a rollover is. It's not a distribution. It's just changing who's holding the money. So that 35% is usually rolled over into another retirement account. What's the nicest retirement account to stick it in? I'm not going to say it's always the best, but the nicest one to stick it in is in your personal account because you've got lots of flexibility, which you'll hear about, lots of investment choices, and you get to keep the housing allowance exclusion. But I've always described this 35% as the maximum you can take out. So the people who retire in the year 2013, they can take anywhere from 0 to 35%. They can say, I want to take out 5, or I want to take out 20. They can decide anywhere from 0 to 35. What changes in the year 2014 is instead of it saying it's a maximum, it is precisely the exact number that has to be taken out. No less and no more. So anyone who retires in the year 2014, the annuity will be on 65% of the account, and that other 35%, you have to move it someplace. You have to roll it over. So starting in 2014, you have to do that. So again, I may have a class of people saying, I'm going to retire in the year 2013 because I can annuitize 90% of my account. And there are a lot of years when that was a great thing to do. In fact, it's still true that the church pays a higher annuity than most insurance companies. If there's an insurance company that's paying higher, you might be a little bit concerned about their financial wherewithal, about how they're able to do that. But just because the church is paying a little bit higher than what the insurance company is doing, because interest rates are so low and you have to lock it up for life, the fact that you 65 all the way up to 90 or even 100, it may not be so good. So the people who retire in the year 2014, they will only be able to annuitize 65%. The other 35% they will stick in their personal account or in an IRA. Is there any question about the one thing that goes away at the end of 2013? This 35% has been around for a while. It's always been described as the maximum that can be taken out. Now it's going to be the exact amount that must be taken out. No more and no less. In the back. Well, this is, yes, you did hear me correctly about talking about there's nothing that's retroactive, but this is a rule change going forward that there was a capability that you have now. That capability is going away in 2014. So it doesn't sort of fit in the category of is it retroactive or not, but it's a for real thing that you cannot do anymore starting in 2014. What I'm indirectly saying to you is even though it's being taken away from you, it might not have been a terribly great thing to do anyway, especially in the year 2013 when interest rates are so low. So now if you go to this article, there was a picture right there. There was an article that came out earlier in this year. It was a part of HARC. It may be something that you're still not going to be terribly inspired to go back and try to read, but it did come with your first quarter statements of account. You can go onto our benefit access system and call up your electronic version of your statement of account and find it, or you can go to our web page, our basic home web page, go to the resources tab where it gives printed materials, and that's where you can find all the back HARC articles. And what are you looking for? You're looking for April of 2012. April 2012 talked about the ministerial pension plan, about the interest rate conversion. And even though it's not shown here on the slide, what I find most interesting about this article is what's on the back. And it shows examples of when interest rates are low, how much smaller the benefit is. And then it has another magic sentence in there. And the magic sentence says, if you think interest rates are going to go up in the future, you might consider waiting to start your annuity. So it's not advice, but we might have some 2013 retirees who, if they can afford it, may say, I'm not going to start my benefit July 1st. I'm going to wait to see if interest rates come back up in the United States. But that's not an easy decision to make because even if interest rates come up, the other thing that sometimes changes is how big is your balance in the ministerial pension plan. What happened back in 2008 and 2009? There was a lot of grief counseling done because of how much those ministerial pension plans quit showing positive numbers. I see some smiles, but I know that that was actually a lot of heartache during that time when those accounts actually did go down quite a bit. And there's nothing that stops that from happening in the future. Okay, let's move on to look at some examples. So here's some examples of annuities. One of the choices is, if you're married, what do you want the spouse to receive? But even if you're single, you could name a second life, and that's what the word contingent annuitant means. We either have annuities that are paid for one life or 2 lives. And if it's paid for 2 lives, it doesn't always have to be the spouse, but it's something you set up at retirement. If that spouse does die and they were a part of the contract, you don't get to name somebody new after they die in retirement. The only time you get to name this person is right at the beginning of setting up the benefit. So sometimes we have reasons why single people choose another person to receive a survivor benefit. The higher the promise to the survivor, if it's a higher promise, it has to cost something. But again, the actuaries are trying to figure out how to make this come out to be fair. So people will come up to me and say, I've got my sheet here at retirement, tell me which one to choose. And one of the things I will say to them is, you know what? Every one of those choices is worth the exact amount of money that you have sitting in your ministerial pension plan. They're all worth exactly the same. What's the important decision-making process is what do you need as a benefit? And if you die, what will the spouse need? And then you're going to see also this other decision about inflation. So the decision isn't about trying to figure out how to beat the game or how to break even or do those kinds of things. It really has to do with the flexibility of this account to meet the needs of all the pension that you're getting. Social Security, IRAs, spouses' benefits. What is it that you need to fill the gap? Do you need a lot of spouse protection or very little? Do you need a lot of inflation protection or very little? And so, in that respects, you're not making a bad decision. You're just simply making the most appropriate decision based on your circumstances. Now, it still is hard for people to do, because trying to estimate how you're going to live in retirement, how you spend your time and money, is sometimes a very complicated thing to do. But if you need the advice, please go see a financial advisor who will help you make the decision. Our office will never tell you what to choose. We'll tell you which box means what, but all that is administrative. It's never going to be advice giving. And that's the reason why we hired Ernst & Young to help you for free. So we're going to talk to you about Ernst & Young. Okay, I think that was the surviving spouse. This has to do with inflation. 2% is what the denomination has been using for a lot of years as its most basic benchmark. But for some people, 2% is not good enough. Travel. So inflation, these lines, even though they're very close to each other, if you end up living a long time in retirement, you may need a lot of inflation. And the reason why they all join fairly close to each other is that's close to your life expectancy. So again, I would say to people, sometimes people always get excited about this break-even point. It's not trying to make it magically to what the actuaries think how long you're going to live. What I always think about is, as a financial planner, the protection you need in case you live a long time. And if you live a short time, think about getting some benefits for the rest of your family. But also, if you don't live very long, obviously you did not need very much of the account along the way. And if the account is still open, you'll leave it to your family. I think that's the last slide about the ministerial pension plan. Let's see. What's the next one? Yeah. So there are big decisions. When to start it, what's the surviving spouse going to get, and what's inflation going to be that you choose. Those are the 3 big choices that you have to make for the ministerial pension plan. And they're critical decisions, and again, you've heard me say several times, get help if these terms don't make any sense to you. But I'm going to move on now to another plan. So unless there was a burning question about that, I'm going to now move to the pre-82. We're running out of fewer and fewer people who have pre-82. But pre-82 is basically a formula benefit. Just like CRISP has this formula, CRISP is just a formula of 1.25 times the denominational average times the years of service. The pre-82 program is not, go back to the formula. The formula, go back one more screen. The pre-1982 is a formula benefit, and it's a formula that's not based on every conference is the same. Now we can look at the example of, in the following screen, is it's based on the past service rate of the conference in which you served. CRISP doesn't matter where you serve. It's always the DAC, 1.25 or 1%. But pre-82, the conferences vote, you as an annual conference vote every spring as to what your past service rate is going to be. So in the year 2012, I believe your past service rate is $530. If I take 10 years and multiply it times 530, I come up with $5,300 divided by 12 is $442. Now again, this is for somebody who is serving all the way up until full retirement, either age 65 or 40 years of service. If somebody comes out earlier than age 65, it's a 6% reduction. And again, if it's we do it to the exact month, so it's a 0.5% for every month short. So this is the formula for somebody who goes all the way to age 65 or 40 years of service, but there's a reduction of 0.5% for every month short. And then the survivor percentage is not something that you choose as an individual. The survivor percentage is something that your conference votes on. And if you served in another annual conference, they may have a different rate and they may have a different surviving spouse percentage. But it's a pretty straightforward calculation. Okay, so those were the 3 church employer pension programs. You have to be retired in order for them to start. Now we're going to deal with the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, UMPIP. So the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan has several sources of contributions. In the old years, when I first started working for the General Board back in the 1970s, the only time that I ever saw monies go into your personal account is somebody came from another denomination or somebody magically happened to be a teacher who had 403B money. The type of pension program we have in the United Methodist Church is called a 403B. You don't really need to know that, but it's the part of the tax code that we have. It's not a 401k plan. It's not a 401A plan. What we have in the United Methodist Church is a 403. So nowadays, it's not only your contributions that go into the account, but if you happen to be second career, or if you happen to be a clergy person who has IRA money, it's been possible for more than a decade to roll over. And remember, the word rollover means not a distribution, but taking money out of one pension bucket and putting it into another. You can put money into your United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. The United Methodist Personal Investment Plan is the only plan that the church has where rollovers go in or out. The only exception to that is the 35% that comes out of the ministerial pension plan. But once you're in retirement and you've made your decision about that 35%, even in retirement, you still get to make a decision about rollovers. So if you're ever trying to contact our office and say, what's that account that I can roll money into or roll money out of, it's basically the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. We can take almost any type of money except that we cannot take a Roth IRA. There are 2 kinds of IRAs, traditional and Roth. The Roth is the non-taxable kind. And the law doesn't prohibit us. It doesn't stop us from doing it. But unfortunately, our computers can't handle keeping the tax people away from your Roth. So we haven't yet set up a computer to be able to handle a Roth IRA. So even if you wanted to roll it over to us, we would contact you and say, don't do it. Even the law permits it. It's not something that you want to the Roth IRA. Okay, so we're going to talk before tax and after tax contributions. The numbers have been very, very high. Those of you who have been around the denomination for a long time, remember these numbers used to be like 900. Go back. The 2013, these numbers have gotten pretty high. You can put in 17,500 next year. And if you're 50 and older, you get to put in a catch-up of 5,500. That already gets you up to $23,000. Now, for people who have served the denomination more than 15 years, believe it or not, there's yet another. On top of the $23,000, an extra 3. You can go all the way up to 26. I don't run into people who really have that much money. And if you do, you probably want to go see your accountant. And the accountant, they may not believe you that you can put in more than $23,000. So make your accountant look up IRS publication 571. 571 has to deal with the fact that you are clergy and that there's a special rule for having served the denomination more than 15 years. So you can put in an extra 3. But you have to be careful because that $3,000 catch-up has a lifetime amount of $15,000. You have to keep track of it. So it's rare. If you happen to be somebody who gets an inheritance, you can't put your inheritance in the church pension program. You have to live off of the money, but every once in a while I'll run into somebody who's willing to take a lot of money out of their salary. And it's huge. It's a large amount of money. Now, why would somebody do this? Pre-tax and after-tax, and I'm going to use my wife as an example, even though she's retired now from one of the annual conferences. My wife is clergy, and I'm lay. Both of us put money into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. When I put $5,000 into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, I save federal income tax, and so would my wife. But when I go to pay my FICA tax, my 7.65, at least next year it will go back up to 7.65 for my FICA tax, I have to include the $5,000 back into my salary when I calculate Social Security. Do you know that the rule is not that way for clergy? So if my wife puts $5,000 as a clergy person into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, just like me, she saves federal income tax. But unlike me, she does not have to pay SECA tax. She does not have to pay the 15.3% going in. And that's a huge tax savings. Does it lower your Social Security benefit? Yeah, but unbelievably little. Because Social Security is based on 35 years, and they're indexed for inflation, and there's a whole lot of other things that Social Security does. But the fact that you've saved 15% Social Security tax is just huge. So federal income tax, 15 or 25, plus Social Security, means that clergy very often can save 40 cents on every dollar that they put into the pension program. That's a huge, huge, huge benefit. Especially for second career clergy, they might even get it out tax-free with a housing allowance. The church didn't make this up. It's the way the rules work. But it's so rare that our pastors are taught how valuable it is to put money into the personal investment plan. So even if we never get a chance to explain how valuable it is, there's actually going to at least be some teeth in that 2014 CRISP, Clergy Retirement Security Program. You don't get the full 3%. You only get 2% if you don't put in 1. So at least we're going to have clergy learning how this works, how to fill it out. And you don't need Charge Conference to change your contributions to your personal account. This is something you can change at any time. You do need Charge Conference to set things like housing allowance. In the fall, usually in late October and November, you have health insurance decisions to make about flexible spending accounts and other kinds of things. But how much money you put into your personal account, the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, is something that you can always change going forward. This is also something you cannot do, quote-unquote, retroactively, because basically it has to come out of your salary. So you can't go and take it out of the salary that you've already been paid in the past. If I want to change it now, it's pretty tough because I'm in late December. But basically I can't take money out that I still haven't been paid. I could take out 2 weeks. You know, if I get 2 weeks worth of salary, theoretically, if I could get the paperwork done fast enough, I could still increase my contributions for 2012. But it's something you can change at any time. You can stop it, start it, and restart it at any time. And that's not always been true. About 10, 15, 20 years ago, you couldn't do that. But the teachers finally got mad at the IRS and they changed the rules. Okay, let's look at some more of your personal account. This is the same rule that it is for CRISP, the same for your CRISP 3% account. You get to take money out of this as fast or as slow as you want to. It's just that your personal account becomes available to you at retirement or age 59 and a half, whichever comes first. So what I'm saying to you is maybe you don't retire until you're 64. You still have access to the account when you turn age 59 and a half. So you can take money out, all of it. You can take it out a partial distribution. And if you take out a partial distribution, we let you take a second check as soon as the new calendar quarter comes around. So basically you can get 4 partial checks per year. That's just by simply saying, I'll fill out a form and take a check. In addition to taking those once per quarter distributions, on top of that, you can say, I need to receive a certain amount of money every month. Those are called cash installments. And you can set up cash installments at any time, start them, stop them, and you can not only set up the cash installments, start and stop them, but on top of that you can ask for an extra check. I was very happy to learn when I came back to work for the General Board about 8 years ago that there were no fees to do this. Most pension programs, they don't like you to do this kind of stuff, so they charge you fees. Banks do this all the time. They charge you a fee every time you want a special check of some kind. But anytime you change your mind, you can do that. And again, once per quarter, you can take out a partial distribution or change your mind about getting monthly payments. Start or stop it. In a longer seminar, we would talk about what happens when you turn age 70 and a half. Because when you turn age 70 and a half, if you're retired, if you're not retired, you get to go to age 72. But if you're retired, once you turn 70 and a half, the IRS has rules about required minimum distributions. And what required minimum distributions has to deal with is the government says, it's nice for you to have had money sitting in this account without ever paying any taxes on it. Now the government says there's a minimum you have to start taking out. But we always calculate that for you and make sure that you take it. We come looking for you. If you're 72 and you haven't taken your yearly required minimum distribution, we're going to try and find you. So don't leave the planet. We're going to seek you out and make sure you get your check. The reason why we do that is the check that you were supposed to take, if you failed to do it, do you know what the IRS penalizes you? 50%. There's an IRS 50% penalty for not taking your required minimum distribution. So nobody likes bad press. We'll always come find you and make sure you get your check. Since this is an account, not a lifetime annuity, whatever is in the account when you die is passed on with your beneficiary form. That's true for your personal account, and that's true for the CRISP 3% account, the Clergy Retirement Security Program. All right, what's next? Okay, that's it for the pension programs. Yes? His question had to do with tax withholding on distributions. There's two kinds of distributions. Those that are spread out over a long time, and what the IRS has as a category is distributions that are expected to last 10 years or longer, or distributions that are like one time, or like a period of payments that's going to only last 5 years. If it's short term, the IRS takes out 20%, or I should say the pension administrator, our office has to withhold 20% whether you want us to or not. You don't have any choice about it. Now you may not owe the taxes, so you might get a refund at tax time, but we are always required to withhold 20% on any one-time distribution or short-term distribution. If it's longer term, you fill out a form that you've probably never seen. It's called a W-4P. The people in your church who are lay employees, they all know what W-4s are because this has to do with anyone who's in a payroll system that has to do with exemptions and how much tax is withheld. So you will get a W-4P form. So for your pre-82 ministerial pension plan, any lifetime benefit, you have a choice whether or not our office withholds nothing, a little, or a lot. And I know I'm representing several different states. You'll see a form that says whether or not your state has withholding for pension or not. But I can answer the federal question that it's always 20% being taken out, and then you may or may not owe it. One of the things I laugh about the 20% is never the right amount. Because somebody who's in retirement, they don't owe 20%. They always owe something higher or lower. But that's unfortunately what the government says we have to take out of the payment. So it goes to your credit. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is something that goes online. We had an old system called OASIS. OASIS used to stand for the Online Access System. It had a 4-digit PIN number. Most people had lost their 4-digit PIN numbers, and that's okay. But this new system that we have called Benefit Access is so powerful today that some of you are going to want to learn to get onto this new system. The other thing that's cumbersome about the old OASIS system is that if you lost your PIN number, we would never, ever, ever help you get onto the system over the telephone. The only way we could ever get you back onto the system was to mail to your parsonage a new PIN number. In this new portal, unfortunately, the PIN is longer than 4 digits, but you finally are going to give us an email. Now, the email we want from you is not pastor at Christ United Methodist Church, chances are you might not be at that church forever. So we want to have a personal email from you. And if you give us a personal email of any kind, then if you lose your password, we'll help you get right back on. By using your email, you can get right back on in 5 minutes. Why would you want to get onto this new benefit access system? Because, first of all, you can quit getting things in the mail. We'll quit sending you those quarterly statements of account. And I happen to love the new statements because they are much more intuitive. They have better graphs. They show you how you did in the market for your accounts. You don't have to turn the page over and figure out how the 7 funds did. It'll tell you how you did. You can look up who your beneficiary designation is and change it. You can look at the readiness tool. You can look at a pension. There are lots and lots of things that this new portal has on it. So I have a sheet with me that if you want to get your PIN mailed to you, because you still need that old PIN to sign up for the new benefit access system. But once you get onto it, you can go green and you can start to get a lot more information from our office. So I'm going to show you a couple screens from benefit access. First, there's the sign-on screen. Here's the sign-on screen. You get to use any username you want as long as some other clergy person didn't take it first. And then once you log on, you'll see a screen that's got a little notebook, your personal notebook. And it's got places where you can get education. There are some electronic learnings that are on there. Again, there are investment resources. And there's articles that you can look up. And we're going to continue to add to this. There hasn't been much out there for retirees, but there's going to be. We're going to be adding something for retirees to go out onto the portal as well. One of the most powerful things from the portal is to do a pension projection. So I think I have an example of a pension projection. These things are very helpful because it shows you something that our office used to not be able to do. It would show you retirement the first of any month. Unfortunately, if you have an old pension projection, those of you who used to get them from our office, they'd always look like you were retiring at age 65 on your birthday. Every cabinet member always wanted to come up to one of our staff and saying, what are you doing showing people's retirement benefit on November 1st? We're not going to give somebody an interim retirement. People go to July. So finally we made this go to July, but it also lets you do a lot of flexibility about the choices for the ministerial pension plan. I used to leave a seminar like this, and people would say, I now want to look at my choices besides the 70% survivor, and maybe I want the 3% increase in my benefit. Can you show me what that is? And I would have to say to them, no. You have to wait until you get your forms 3 months before you retire. So that wasn't useful. But now this new pension projection system will show you very usefully what you need to know years before you retire. So there's some other example screens that we'll go through real quick here. This is the bottom part of the page that adds the numbers together. What's maybe a little bit still confusing about this is that the number that's at the bottom that shows estimated monthly income, there's something that says expected value in today's dollars. The word today's dollars has to deal with how does this money feel like in the year 2012. So it doesn't show somebody retiring in 2050 getting a $200,000 pension. It says it's going to feel like a $30,000 pension in today's economy. And that's the way Social Security has always done it. It never tells you what the big number is off in the future. It has always told you what it feels like in today's dollars. So that's the most important number, and I usually circle it when I sit down with somebody and look at their pension projection. I think the next sections that we have are I'm going to skip these two because the 4% method has actually disappeared. This new service I want to mention to you is this is one of the things that the entire United States, not just the United Methodist Church and all the other denominations, but all pension programs in our country are sitting with 401k plans and 403b plans, and people are going crazy to figure out what's a safe amount of money to take out. There's still the danger of running out of money, but they need to know how to invest it and how to take it out. And it's one of the reasons why sometimes people take money out of the church to go find an advisor who doesn't understand very much about the church or the housing allowance. So this new service is finally going to be a part of LifeStage that will be extremely powerful, and this is one of the places, again, where the church is leading not just other denominations, but the whole country. And it's going to be called, the name of it's not even up there, it's called LifeStage Retirement income service. Life stage retirement income service. The only place that that word exists is on your as part of the agenda. It's the second slide that you have in your material. Life stage retirement income. So watch for it. We're going to start to promote it. You're going to start to see it on the benefit access, but watch for brochures. But anytime in public, I like to tell people that it's coming because it's going to be a very, very useful service. Okay, we're going to wind up the discussion here. This is a readiness tool. Let's skip through this. I need to talk about the housing allowance. You should have a sheet in front of you. I'm going near a microphone. It's called the Housing Allowance Worksheet. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but this piece of paper is going to be given to you again at retirement. But the Housing Allowance Worksheet is worth its weight in gold, especially when you retire, mostly because of the back sheet, the back of it. The back of it describes how you do this on your income tax return. The front side is something you can use while you're active. It isn't just applicable when you retire. But if you go back a couple slides, the first thing to remind you about is, before the example, there is the rule. One more. The rule is the same in retirement as when you're active. Housing allowance is the smallest of designation, the amount spent, or the fair rental value. Those are the rules while you're active. They're the same rules when you retire. Designation, amount spent, fair rental value. The smallest of those three. What changes in retirement? It's who does the designating. And then when you're in retirement, that's where this resolution comes from. Your annual conference votes on this every year. And you know what the percentage is of your pension that's subject to housing allowance? It's 100%. And it doesn't get any better than that. The only difficulty is that we have 3 rules, not just 1. You can't designate it all and forget the other 2. The other 2 are what did you spend and what's the fair rental value. So I've got 4 examples for you. Let's look at A and B. The reason why I give you these examples is I don't like people coming up to retirement and falsely believing that they can take money out of their pension account and avoid paying taxes on their down payment. People always take money out of their pension program as a down payment, and they think they can avoid paying taxes on it. It's hard for that to work. So this person retires in January. They make their down payment of $44,000, and they start their monthly pension of $2,500. Fictitious example, just for teaching purposes. So the person took out a $44,000 amount, and they started their pension. $44,000 plus $2,500 per month. $2,500 per month is $30,000 for a whole year. If they get $30,000 worth of pension and a $44,000 as a one-time payment in January 1st, those two added together are $74,000. I now know the first of my 3 numbers from my worksheet because the designation is all of your pension. Pre-82, ministerial pension plan, clergy retirement security program, and your personal account. All of it is housing allowance. So this person got $74,000. They actually spent in the first year of retirement $75,000. It's a lot of money to spend. Remember, $44,000 of it was for a down payment. But sometimes when you move into a house and go out of the parsonage, the first place you live, you might have to fix it up somehow. Might do some landscaping, might do some decorating of some kind, may have to change a bathroom or a window or other kinds of stuff. This person spent $75,000, and that's things that come from number 2 on the worksheet. Things like utilities, property taxes, insurance, things like that. If I add it all up, it's $75,000. The IRS has been very clear since 2002 that the fair rental value is also part of the law. It got challenged by Rick Warren, but he lost. So fair rental value is a part of our calculation. And the fair rental value is what a fully furnished, all utilities paid, fully maintenance taken care of property. Doesn't have to be a house. It can be a condo, a townhouse. You have to be careful if you live in a retirement community because sometimes health care is a part of that payment that you make. But it's whatever the fair rental value is. This person's living in a $24,000 fair rental value. So what's the smallest of my three numbers? It's not 74, it's not 75. The smallest number is 24. So I only get to exclude the smallest, 24,000. What do I exclude the 24,000 from? My pension, 74. 74 minus 24 is 50. I have to pay taxes on 50,000. Now look at example B. What happens if my down payment came out of something other than my pension account? If I took $44,000 from someplace else, I still got a $30,000 pension, and it got designated as house allowance. I still spent 75. Remember, the 44,000 came from someplace outside of the pension program, so I still spent 75. My fair rental value is still 24, but now I'm subtracting 24 from 30. And 24 from 30 is 6. Notice that I'm paying taxes, subject to taxes of 6,000, as opposed to something subject to taxes of 50. Those are two huge numbers. You know what the difference is between 50 and 6? 44. Have you seen that number someplace else on the page here? 44,000 happens to magically be the amount of the down payment. And I use this as a teaching example because I don't want people coming up to retirement magically believing that the housing allowance is going to protect their down payment from taxes. You need to think about where your down payment's going to come. So I commend the sheet to you. I'm not going to go through the next couple of examples. In fact, I want to skip to the very last slide of this presentation, which talks about Ernst & Young. There we go. One more. Ernst & Young is one of the largest consulting firms in the world. Their services that they provide for financial planning don't have anything that they sell to people. There's no insurance. There's no investments. And so the church has hired Ernst & Young to be financial planners. And we started this program back in 2006. What we were told in the United Methodist Church is the best way to introduce this program is to charge for it. Give people a nice discount. So we did that. It cost $99 if you signed up before April 1st. Otherwise, it was $149. And you're limited to 3 hours of advice. It turns out that too few people in our denomination signed up for this. So we went against the advice that we were given and said, we'll make it free. But I think it happens to be that we also made it free when? Mostly when the stock market started to fall apart in 2008. So now there are lots and lots of people who call Ernst & Young for financial planning, for investment advice, for tax advice dealing with your being a United Methodist clergy. They understand our pension program. And if you get your material at retirement and need to talk to a financial advisor for free, call Ernst & Young. You're not 3 hours. It's unlimited. And it's helpful if you do it, obviously, before you get right up to the month that you get your packet from our office. Get a hold of them the year before so that you have a working relationship with somebody from their office. You will never meet them because it's all done either by telephone, online, or through correspondence. But you can call almost any time during the day, not too late. They have a San Diego office and they have a New Jersey office, but they've got very wide hours when you can talk to them. Now, for some of you, you're never going to want to work with them because you're afraid that if you don't get to meet them face-to-face, it's too hard to trust them and to work with them. And that's okay. But for those of you who have financial advisors, it's also always nice to know that you can get a second opinion. So just like in the medical world, when you have a doctor and you need to get a second opinion about something, use Ernst & Young as somebody who's checking out the advice that you have, especially because this advice doesn't come tainted with any commissions or any fees along with it. So if you're getting bad advice from somebody, Ernst & Young will tell you that. I'm about to change to health insurance, but when we get ready to change slides here, has anyone ever used Ernst & Young in this room? Okay, there's a little more than a half dozen people. And you can go and ask them in terms of how their experience was and see how that was. But they have an 800 number to call, and the conference will never know, and our office will never know whether you contacted them or not. All the things that you do with them are completely confidential.